It was the 4th of July, a humid summer evening when the air felt heavy against the skin and the entire neighborhood seemed wrapped in that familiar mixture of anticipation and nostalgia that always accompanies fireworks. And instead of packing up a cooler, fighting through traffic, and squeezing into an overcrowded park where strangers would be pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath the same sky, I chose the quieter option of unfolding my old lawn chair on the edge of my own front yard, positioning it carefully on the grass where I knew from experience there was a perfectly unobstructed view between the tall maple trees lining the street, because from that exact angle the community fireworks launched from the park half a mile away would rise high enough to be seen clearly above the rooftops without my ever having to leave the comfort of home. The neighborhood itself was calm in that deceptively alert way. Suburban streets often are during holidays, with porch lights glowing warmly, children zigzagging along the sidewalks with sparklers that hissed and fizzed in their small hands, distant laughter drifting from backyard gatherings, and the faint scent of charcoal and lighter fluid hanging in the air long after grills had been shut off. And as I leaned back in my chair with a cold soda resting in the cup holder sewn into the armrest, I felt a quiet contentment settle over me, because there is something uniquely satisfying about enjoying a public celebration from private property, where the only crowd consists of familiar houses and trimmed hedges rather than impatient strangers shifting for space. Across the street lived a woman named Linda, though within the privacy of neighbors' conversations she had long ago acquired the nickname Karen because of her well-documented tendency to monitor the block as if she had been appointed its unofficial supervisor, often interpreting harmless deviations from routine as potential threats that required commentary or correction. And as I adjusted the angle of my chair slightly to align with the clearing between the trees, I noticed her already standing at the edge of her driveway, with her arms folded tightly across her chest, her posture rigid and her gaze sweeping slowly across the street as though she were conducting an inspection rather than preparing to watch fireworks. When the first official burst of color exploded above the park shortly after 9:30, illuminating the sky with a brilliant cascade of red and gold that briefly transformed the navy darkness into a glowing canvas, I smiled instinctively and took a slow sip of my drink, listening to the synchronized oohs and ahs echoing from nearby houses. And for the first several minutes everything unfolded exactly as it should have, with fireworks blooming and fading in rhythmic succession while neighbors enjoyed the spectacle from porches, sidewalks, and driveways without incident. It was only after I felt the weight of a prolonged stare that I realized Linda's attention was not directed toward the sky but toward me, and when she began crossing the street with deliberate, measured steps, sandals striking the pavement in sharp, purposeful beats, I straightened slightly in my chair, sensing that her approach carried more tension than simple curiosity. "What exactly are you doing?" she demanded once she reached the edge of my lawn, her tone carrying a sharp edge of accusation that felt wildly disproportionate to the obviousness of the situation unfolding overhead. I gestured upward as another burst of blue and silver scattered across the sky in shimmering arcs, replying evenly that I was watching the fireworks because the view from my yard happened to be particularly clear, and I made a conscious effort to keep my voice calm and neutral because experience had taught me that escalating tone often fuels misunderstandings rather than resolves them. She narrowed her eyes slightly and glanced around the dimly lit street before focusing back on me, saying that it looked strange to see someone sitting alone in the dark. And although her words were framed as observation rather than accusation, the implication was unmistakable, as though the mere act of sitting quietly on my own property after sunset carried some hidden intent that required explanation. I responded by pointing out, as gently as possible, that I was seated entirely within the boundary of my lawn, that porch lights and street lamps provided ample illumination, and that the fireworks themselves lit up the entire neighborhood every few seconds in brilliant flashes. But I could tell from the set of her jaw that logic was not guiding her interpretation of events, and instead she appeared to be constructing a narrative in which my stillness equaled suspicion, simply because it deviated from her expectation of how people should behave during a holiday celebration. Without warning, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her movements abrupt and theatrical, and within moments I heard her speaking in a tone of heightened urgency, informing the dispatcher that there was a man sitting alone in the dark watching houses, framing my quiet presence as though it were an act of surveillance rather than simple enjoyment of fireworks. And as the words left her mouth, I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me, because the situation had shifted from mildly awkward to potentially serious in a matter of seconds. I stood slowly from my lawn chair, placing my soda carefully on the grass and raising my hand slightly to ensure my posture conveyed non-aggression rather than confrontation, because I understood all too well how quickly perceptions can harden once authority becomes involved, and within minutes the glow of red and blue lights appeared at the end of the street, flashing rhythmically against the facadas of houses and mingling oddly with the colorful explosions still bursting overhead. When the patrol car rolled to a stop in front of my house, and two officers stepped out with composed professionalism, I met them halfway across the lawn and explained in measured detail that I was watching the community fireworks from my own yard because it offered a clear vantage point, presenting my driver's license to confirm my address matched the house directly behind me, while across the street Linda spoke animatedly to the second officer, repeating phrases like lurking and just sitting there, as though those words alone implied wrongdoing. The first officer glanced at my lawn chair, then at the illuminated sky, then back at me with an expression that suggested he was already piecing together the obvious context, and after a brief exchange, he addressed her in a calm but firm voice, explaining that sitting on one's own property to watch fireworks is not illegal and does not constitute suspicious activity simply because it makes someone else uncomfortable. And although she attempted to insist that the behavior appeared unusual, the officer reiterated that perception alone does not create a crime. As the conversation concluded and the patrol car prepared to leave, the final sequence of fireworks erupted in rapid succession, filling the sky with overlapping bursts of red, white, and gold that shimmered and crackled in dramatic layers. And I felt an odd mixture of embarrassment and vindication settle over me, because while the spectacle of flashing police lights had briefly overshadowed the celebration, the truth of the situation had remained steady and unshaken throughout. When the officers departed and Linda retreated into her house without another word, closing her door firmly behind her, I returned to my lawn chair and sat back down, refusing to relinquish the simple pleasure I had set out to enjoy in the first place. And as the final sparks faded into drifting smoke against the dark sky, I reflected on how easily ordinary behavior can be reframed as suspicious through the lens of personal bias, and how essential it is to remain composed and grounded in reality when confronted with exaggerated claims, because in the end the most powerful response to misplaced accusation is neither anger nor retreat, but calm persistence and the quiet confidence of knowing that sitting peacefully on your own lawn, watching fireworks bloom that fade above familiar rooftops, is not only harmless but entirely within your right.